Kia ora, my name is Robbie and I'm another white man behind a desk. We get a lot of requests for topics people want us to cover, and some of those requests are not the TPPA, but most of them aren't not. We've had Facebook messages, emails, and compliments that rapidly turn into demands. How is your skin so smooth? Do the TPPA! Now, we here at White Man Behind a Desk are nothing if not responsive, which is why we ignored those requests literally 100% of the time. But last week, something amazing happened. The Right Honourable John Key, Prime Minister of New Zealand and man who thinks most New Zealanders will agree at the end of the day, asked us to cover the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. Sort of. John Key saw the thousands of people protesting the TPPA, and he said he was worried. The protesters are misinformed, he said. They're misinformed. According to John Key, 1/3 of the protesters should be dismissed because they were rent-a-crowd protesters who opposed any free trade deal. And while that statement is based on absolutely no evidence, it's still unsettling. In the same way that it's unsettling to think about the evil clown under your bed. I mean, he's not real, but it would still be nice if he went away. So we're going to help John Key out. We don't want him to ever have to dismiss protesters as misinformed or blindly anti-trade ever again. So from now on, at the request of John Key, we're going to take a break from our typical videos and devote ourselves to informing the protesters. #inform the protesters. By the end of this episode, he won't have to dismiss protesters as anti-trade ever again because we're going to explain why trade is good. And if we share this video enough, we'll know that the protesters aren't anti-trade. They're just anti-TPP. Okay. Let's take two random countries like Russia and Saudi Arabia, and two random products like homoerotic literature and rainbow flags. Okay, now let's say Russians and Saudi Arabians love homoerotic literature and rainbow flags, which is, it's a hypothetical. Okay, so let's assume that Russia is 10 times faster at producing homoerotic literature and twice as fast at producing rainbow flags. So Russia is better than Saudi Arabia at producing both things. Now, the theory of comparative advantage, listen in, protesters, claims that if Russia and Saudi Arabia traded and focused on the thing they do best, if Russia just produced books about passionate homosexual love and Saudi Arabia just stitched together flags of love and equality, then they would both be better off. Here's why. In our hypothetical, Saudi Arabia is less productive, which means their wages are lower than in Russia. Let's say 3 times lower because on average they produce about 3 times less stuff. That means that when Saudi Arabia makes rainbow flags, they make half as many, but they do it for 1/3 of the labor cost. And when Russia makes homoerotic literature, the labor costs 3 times as much, but they produce 10 times the quantity. Both countries are able to produce their thing more cheaply. So the wages stay the same, and there are more books and flags, so everything's cheaper, and all the workers can afford more stuff. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't problems. In our hypothetical, all the Saudi Arabians who are writing homoerotic literature have to retrain as flag makers, which means those writers will need some serious support from the government. And similarly, in Russia, Putin will have to start teaching flag makers how to write beautiful gay sex scenes, which I assume will be challenging for him. Also, our hypothetical Russians might start to ask the question, are we exploiting Saudi Arabia? Should we make them treat their workers more fairly? And the answer to that question is maybe, because as it turns out, the answer in economics is almost always maybe. It's a very uncertain field. Nobody knows what they're doing. Deciding whether to ban awful things in trade is a difficult decision. On the one hand, if you don't ban enough, then you're saying child labor's fine, which was the view Labour took in our free trade agreement with China. Unfortunately, child labor is definitely not fine. On the other hand, the thing white people like to forget is that we got rich by being the most awful anyone has ever been. When Britain was making its money, my ancestors were using child slaves to dig for coal. And then when the child slaves died, we just burnt the coal to ship in more slaves. It was only after centuries of slavery and pollution when we become supremely rich that we decided it was time to change the rules. Sorry, developing countries. It was fine when we did it, but we just noticed it was evil. It seemed fine. Now we're rich. Definitely evil. And while the appropriate response for developing countries is to just yell, "Fuck you, white people, it's not as clear what rich countries should do. Right-wing people often say, let's set up a factory there, it's all fine, don't think about it. And left-wing people often say, we can't trade with them, let's exclude them and they'll probably be rich and fine and happy forever, don't think about it. Neither strategy is great. It seems like rich countries should provide financial support to developing countries so that they can catch up without having to be as evil as we were, but we shouldn't exclude them from trade. And there you go. Comparative advantage is one of the main reasons that trade is good. You need to have plans to handle job reallocation and to prevent exploitation, but neither of those things prevents trade from being good. And if we share this video, then John Key won't ever have to dismiss protesters for being anti-trade ever again. They're just anti-TPP. But we'll get to that next time. I'll just be waiting here. See you soon. Bye.